I have 5 presentations. I'm going to be covering Islam as I've been doing over the last month or so. The first thing I'm going to do with my first 2 presentations, I believe, is I'm going to recap and just bring everyone up to speed. I'm also going to go over the same material a little bit slower than I did in my presentations at Lambert, which will allow me to read some of the quotes I missed and to cover a couple things that I wasn't able to cover, so hopefully that will be a blessing just to recap that. And then starting tomorrow, I will begin touching the next steps of that presentation. As I've said before, this is a bit of a work in progress, so if anyone has any comments or any insights that would help me or help us as a movement to understand the role of Islam better, I welcome them. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to cover what we already know, or what we've been saying for some time now. And the best place to do that is in Revelation chapter 9. So if you would turn there with me. Now, someone can correct me if I'm wrong. This is how I understand it, but my memory is a little bit foggy about the exact flow of events. So I'm going to tell it as I understand it, but correct me if I'm wrong. Back in, can't even remember the year at this point, I guess 2015, maybe 2016, we began looking at the binding off. Does anyone know that year? Was it 15 or 16? 16? Okay, in 16 we began looking at the binding off, and what we understood, does anyone know how we derived the binding off? Where did we Well, the terminology comes from the wheat and the tares, the binding off, the wheat and the tares are bound. But the concept was that we had this space of time, where the message was culminated and finished. And does anyone know the structure in which we got that from? The time of Jacob's trouble fit into there, but yeah, that is what helped us to understand the climax of it, I guess. But does anyone know why we said there was that point of time where we say it is today? And where we say it is today is Raphia, or as we used to say it back in those moments was midnight. I guess we still say it that way. Midnight to the midnight cry, we had the space of time. Where did we get that from? Now there's a bit of logic that goes with that. Does anyone remember? The remarkable thing is when you go back, and I have the struggle, I imagine other people do as well, when you try to go back to those years from, at least since I've been here, and try to remember how we did things. You know, you look at your life, you're like, I believe something today, but why do I believe that? Where did I get there? This is one of those things that's a little bit of, there's stepping stones to it. And I guess the first step in those stepping stones was Ezra 7:9. Ezra 7:9 gives you the first day of the first month in the first day of the 5th month. We're all familiar with that? Amen? Now, when you get that structure, it gives you those 4 months. Those 4 months of time are 120 days, and then it gives you October 22nd, and so on and so forth. And we started getting the structure, and we were realizing that middle way mark was the midnight cry. So you had 9/11, the midnight cry, and then the Sunday law, October 22nd. That was how we initially understood Ezra 7:9. And from that point, we ended up going into the Bible and plugging in all the first day of the first months, all the first day of the 5th months, and going into all these different things. But then what did we stumble across at some point? What day? The what? 5th day of the 4th month. You come to what the Millerites understood to be as midnight. So there was this space of time from July 21st, 1844 to August 15th of the same year, 1844, and that's where the midnight cry message was taking place. It actually arrived on July 21st and went forward. And from there, eventually what we understood was that we had this little space of time, and then as we were looking, and this is the part I'm a bit fuzzy on, we come to the point to where we were looking at Luke chapter 1 and Revelation 9. And these were probably the 2 things that really help us to solidify the idea of the binding off, or midnight to the midnight cry. Now, Does anyone remember why that happened? What did those two lines do for us, Luke 1 and Revelation 9? It gave us the 150. So if you go to Revelation 9 and Luke 1, there's this 5-month period that's marked in both chapters. And we realized that this was the time from 9/11 to what we call now Raphia, or midnight. And if you go to Revelation chapter 9, which you should be there, it starts off. And so my point in telling that is there's this flow of events that gets us to this point to where we're placing the history of Revelation 9, which is this top line here, in the history of our time. And what we understand is that 606 is representing 1989. I'm going to use a different color. Am I allowed to use red? So what we understand was 1989 is representing 606, and the reason is because in 606, now it's not exactly in the year 606, but about that time, you have a conflict going on between the Eastern Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire at that time, and they're fighting for supremacy. They're the two major superpowers at that time, and they're fighting for control of the world, I guess you could say, the known world at that time. And this battle, as seen in Revelation 9 and as understood by the pioneers, is the thing that's going to open the way for Islam to rise. Because if you can geographically picture the Middle East and where modern-day Turkey is, you have modern-day Turkey, and it goes down, and then it kind of opens up into the rest of the Middle East. And on the west side of what we'd call the Middle East, you have the Mediterranean, and you have Israel, and underneath that you have the Arabian Peninsula, where Islam is going to come from. We'll talk about that in a moment. But to the east, you have that portion of, and from Turkey, if you go east, you come into what we understand is I don't know what you'd call, what's the name of that place right there, where Iran is. You know, you come to that point right there, and this is where the Persian Empire is seated, right there. So that's the geographical depiction that's going on here. And I draw, if I had a little bit more time, I would have drawn a map. I won't attempt it now because it'll be awful. But as you look at that, what you see is that these two powers are clashing in the north of the Arabian Peninsula, and in this conflict, these two superpowers are wearing each other out, and they've been fighting for a long time, and they're both weary of this conflict. And Heraclius is going to make one final effort to win the engagement. And so what he does, and him being the king of the north in this history, as we look at 1989, what he's going to do is he's going to make one last-ditch effort, and he's going to somehow stealthily, with as many men as he has, go to the north along my geography of that area is not great. It's where all the stands are, like Uzbekistan and all those areas, right around there. He's going to go up, and he's going to come around, the back and attack the Persian Empire right at its heart. And there's going to be a great battle there, and he catches them by surprise, and he wins, but at great cost to himself. But he wins. And he defeats the Persian Empire, but he's greatly weakened by that. And so during that time, as the pioneers understand, and as we're probably all familiar with, you have the rise of Islam taking place. And I know we're all familiar with this history, I hope we are at least, but there's implications as we begin to look a little bit more closely moving forward, and we'll get back to those things. And so I just want to put these concepts in your mind as I retell this familiar story. So you have the rise of Islam taking place here, and that vacuum that's created by these two superpowers, just like the United States, in Russia, these two superpowers are fighting, opens a space for Islam to rise in our history as well. And it's going to rise, and it's going to eventually become a problem for the world, just like it happened then. And I forget the year off the top of my head, but in the year 600 and I want to say the 30s, 630s, right around there, maybe right around there, you're going to have the first engagement between the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic forces at that time. And what they're going to do is they're going to conquer Syria. But that's not important to our history right now in this moment. I just want to identify the fact that Islam becomes a power during this space of time as they rise. And in Revelation 9 verse 1, you have it depicted as the fifth angel sounding, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit, and he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And so at this point, the pioneers understand that this is representing Muhammad. Muhammad's going to be a false messenger, a fallen star, so to speak, and he's going to now have, the bottomless pit is going to open. And what Muhammad understood, there's two things that happen. This key that he has, the key is two things. One, it's the battle that takes place, but it's also his information that he has. He has the information that somehow he understands that through this conflict, he understands that Rome is going to win, but they're both going to be weakened, and he sends emissaries, he sends messengers to both empires telling them, bow to me now, and we won't have trouble later. I won't cause any problems for you, and I won't have to conquer you later. And both empires obviously don't submit at that point, and he's going to eventually, not him, but him through his Islam later is going to conquer both empires. So you see this rising taking place. And so that's 606. Now, an interesting thing, and I think it's something worth noting, and maybe it's something we haven't seen, but when you come to what we call 1299, which is 9/11, there's a little bit of a trick that we do here, and I'm not sure we're all familiar with that we do it. And I want to explain it for a moment. So if you come to verse 4, so verses 1 to 3 are describing the history from 606 to 1299. This is the rise of Islam. And finally, when you come to verse 4, you have this verse here, and it says, "And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their forehead." So what's being described here is this distinction that Islam is going to make. Now, Islam they're going to begin their conquest, and what they're going to do. Now, does anyone know when this verse is taking place? What's the year marked of this verse? Verse 4. What year is verse 4? What? So if we don't know the year, who's giving the command? What? Abu Bakr is going to be giving it. And so, anyone know what 632. So this decree, verse 4, is taking place in the year 632. So black. I'm going to draw this over here. I'm going to take this little bit of history and I'm going to put it over here. Now this is, I didn't really intend to get into this, but I think it's actually a good exercise to show this. So we have what we really call 1299, and we have 9/11, and this is 606, 1989. And what's going to happen here is we're going to take this decree and we're going to put it at 9/11, the decree of Abu Bakr. Why do we do that? What justification do we have to move Abu Bakr's decree to differentiate between those who have the seal of God and those who do not to this point here? Revelation chapter 7, describing the sealing and the sealing angel that's coming. That comes from the east. And this angel is going to do what? What does he do? Sorry, not this angel, not the angel that has the seal, but what are the other angels doing that are present in chapter 7? They're holding back the four winds. So there's a restraint on the four winds taking place here, which Sister White describes as an angry horse seeking to break forth and bring death and destruction upon the world. So the four winds are being restrained. So Islam is being restrained. Why? What needs to take place? The seal needs to be placed on God's people. So there's a delay that needs to take place. So when we look at, and there's an uncanny resemblance between, a purposeful resemblance between Revelation 9 verse 4 and Revelation 7. They're talking about the same things. You have the same depiction of the green grass and the trees. And so Abu Bakr is telling his people in 6:30, what did you say, 6:32? Let me do it this way. He's telling his people in 6:32 that they need to be restrained, and they need to differentiate between two groups of people, the bad guys and the people who have the seal of God. So you have two classes there, and the seal of God is the distinguishing feature you want to see. So we're going to take 6:32, but we're also going to take, as we see here, 1299. So both of these points are going to illustrate 9/11 for us. Now, is anyone familiar that we do that? How many of us notice that we bring both of those points together? There's over 600 years difference between these events, but we bring them into one point and say that they're the same thing going on. Now, there's reasons you can do that, I believe, and we're not going to touch it right now, but I just want to say that you can do that, and I'll mention why I'll mention it at least, but we won't go into it. Sorry, my numbers are small. They're nice and big there. They're small here. Part of the reason for that, and it's something we need to look into, part of my suggested reason, I guess, is that if you remember when Brother Theodore was here, he talked about two 150-year periods. In verse, I think he gets, in the chapter, we'll just say in the chapter, there's 150-year periods. And one of them begins from 632 with the decree, and the other one begins from 1299. Are we familiar with that? Okay, well, familiar that that's been said. And so it's something we need to look into a little bit, but I think that might be one of the justifications for bringing these two things together, because I've never heard a good explanation of why we are able to bring two dates that are over 600 years apart and conflate them into one. And I think the reason you can do that is because of the 150-year periods. But what you see when you do that is that 632 is describing the seal of God and this differentiation between the good guys and the bad guys. And 1299 marks what? What happens in 1299? Well, the 5 months is going to begin, and what are they able to do now? They can't kill yet. They can hurt. They're going to be hurting. They're going to hurt Rome for a while. They're going to torment. Maybe that's a better word. They're going to torment Rome for 150 years or 5 months. Now, while they're doing this, one, you have to note that there's a restraint being placed on them. That they're not able to kill. They're able to do a lot, but they can't quite do it. How was this verse fulfilled in history? What happened? Say again? Historically, in the historical setting, what happened? What?
Wasn't there a battle at Nicomedia?
Nicomedia? There's going to be an invasion of Nicomedia by who? Who invades Nicomedia in 1299? What? Othman. Othman's going to invade Nicomedia in 1299. And why is this important? Why is him invading in 1299 significant? What does he also do in 1299 or around that time? He unites all of the Islamic world together under one government system. And this can be found, now we're jumping a lot of verses, but this can be found in verse 11, Revelation 9:11. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. So the king that is over them is Othman, who's going to unite them together. This is just pioneer understanding. And this is the first attack with a united front. I guess that's probably the best way to say that, because what you find is, if you don't say it that way, you can't say this is the first time that, you can't say 1299 is the first time that Islam ever attacked the Roman Empire, because that's just categorically not true, because I just told you that in the year 632, at least in the year 632 with Abu Bakr, you're going to have an engagement between Rome and the Islamic forces. So you have to preface it by saying this is when they have a king over them, and the first time they truly have a king over them in one united group is here in 1299 with Othman. Now, one thing that we see as we look into Islamic history is that the center, or let me say Islamic history attached to prophetic history, if you bring in those two things together, prophecy and Islam, the center of Islam is going to move. Now, if you're looking in the year 606, you're talking about Arabian Islam. This is the Arabian Peninsula, right in the birthplace of this is Saudi Arabia, really, in that area. But as you go forward and you come to 1299, the place or the center is going to change, and now you're all the way in. Now you're in Turkey. Now you're dealing with the Ottoman Empire, rather. And so it's going to, which is up north. That's obviously not in. That's higher north around Turkey. They're eventually going to take over all of Turkey later, but. So the geography is going to change a little bit, but there's some consistent features that you see, and we'll talk about those later, but the geography does change as you go forward. But it starts off in the Arabian Peninsula. Okay. So 606, we have this battle between the king of the north and the king of the south, leads to the rise of Islam, which we see pretty clearly here in 1989. And we come to 1299, where we're conflating or bringing together the decree of Abu Bakr and in verse 4, but also the first king in verse 11, bringing those together and seeing that you have a, let's say it this way, you have a united Islam. Maybe that's a bad way of saying that, not clear enough, but you have a differentiation between the seal of God and those who don't have the seal of God, marked by the sealing process that's taking place at 9/11 forward. But you also have a caliphate marked. You have a united king. Now, that's something I think we have to look at a little bit more and delve into that, because I don't think the caliphate is as clear-cut as it maybe appears to be or doesn't appear to be. For instance, we were saying that for instance, one of the things, the way we mark the caliphate in 1299 is we say that Osama bin Laden had the intention of starting a caliphate, but he was never able to do it. But just because he had the intention of starting a caliphate at 9/11, this fits as the caliphate being marked at 9/11 forward, or in the time of Osama bin Laden until he's going to die years later. Then we have another caliphate marked in 2014, 2015. Hopefully I'll make it a little bit bigger. I know it's probably hard to see back there. So we have another caliphate marked in 2014. This is the caliphate of ISIS that we're probably all familiar with. This is what ISIS is going to do, and we'll talk about ISIS in a little bit more depth as we go forward. But what ISIS is going to do is they're going to unite parts of Syria, parts of eastern Syria, and parts of Iraq, a lot of Iraq actually, together, and they're going to declare a caliphate. And then that caliphate, as we understand, or as we see today, is been removed, no longer present. That caliphate's been broken up. So is that the caliphate? So we had the intention of a caliphate at 9/11, and then but with no actual caliphate marked, at least by Osama bin Laden. But then we had another caliphate marked in 2014 under, interestingly enough, the ISIS leader is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and he's going to declare his caliphate. Caliphate's also removed. only a couple years later, presently. This is present history, I guess, a couple months, or last month. It was, or maybe even days ago, a couple weeks ago. So my question is, do those mark the caliphate, or is there something else we need to look into a little bit more, or understand it a little bit differently to explain the caliphate? And I would suggest we have to look at that a little bit deeper, a little bit closer. But we're not going to do that in that moment. I just want to raise that point that it's one of the things we've been grappling with is the idea of the caliphate, and I think we need to give that another once over as we look through Revelation 9 and the prophetic histories and our present history. Okay, so going forward, so what's neat about 1299 is it is the first. It's the okay. I won't say that. Let's move forward. Let's go to 1449. We'll come back to that thought. So in 1449, you have the 150 years, as we were talking about before. This also lines up with Luke chapter 1. So you have this 150 years or 5 months taking you to 1449. And what happens in 1449? So 1449, before we answer, where's my red? Before we answer, 1449, as we understand it, is midnight. Before we understood Raphia, but then we understood midnight is Raphia. So we understand this to be Raphia. And part of the reason we got there, as I was saying before, is we saw that in Luke chapter 1 and in Revelation 9, we have this 150-year period, and it takes you to, if you look at the history of Luke chapter 1, you have 5 months, and then what do you have after that? You have 1 month, you have the 6th month. And in the 6th month, we can show that that is the midnight cry. And so we understood that to be the midnight cry. So there's a point, we're saying, okay, there's some point that's before the midnight cry, because we saw that the characteristics of that 6th month really fit with all the things we had been looking at about the midnight cry. And so we're saying, okay, there's this point before that. And as we're doing that, we're seeing July 21st, we're seeing midnight cry. So this is that's a very summacious way of saying Raphia and midnight and explaining this differentiation there between midnight and the midnight cry. So what happens in 1449? What's the historical fulfillment of those verses? So let's read them really quick just for one moment. So go down to we'll start from verse 12. It says, "One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter." And one thing I forgot to mention is that 606 is the 5th trumpet, but then 1299 is going to mark the first woe. And then it's going to go forward. They're both going to be going forward. You are in the dispensation of the 5th trumpet and the first woe, and both of them are going to come to an end here in 1449. And now you're going to have the beginning of the 6th trumpet and then the beginning of also the 2nd woe. And just to put some thoughts onto that. So verse 13, "And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men. And the number of the army and of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them." Okay. So what is the historical fulfillment of these verses? What took place? (1449). So 1449 is really interesting for a lot of reasons. 1449 is really interesting for a lot of reasons, but the reason it's really interesting is that it's the next waymark. It's midnight. And I've said this before, and I keep saying it again, not really as a rebuke, but sort of as just like a factual thing, is that we really don't understand the fulfillment of 1449. So the historical facts of 1449 are as follows. So the king, the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire is going to die. And he had no heir. And so what happens is there's a little bit of a power vacuum. There's an unsure line of succession. And the brother of the emperor is going to step forward. His name is Constantine. I forget the number. Constantine with some number after him. 11. Constantine the 11th. And he's going to rise to the throne. And what does he do before he rises to the throne? What? So he submits to Islam. Let me say it a different way. He's going to go to the 4 angels, or the 4 sultans as the pioneers understood it, and he's going to say, can I rise to the throne? For all intents and purposes. I don't know exactly how he said it, of course, but he's going to ask for permission to rise to the throne. And the premier power of those 4 sultans is going to say, yes, you can rise to the throne, and we accept your rise to the throne. We accept your kingship or your emperorship. And so he's submitting to Islam before he rises to the throne. Now that is, as you think about that, there's implications to that. But before we get to that, I want to just draw some things here quickly. So who are our 4 sultans? Now I don't actually know all the names of them, but what do we know about the locations? There's 4 locations that are marked as these 4 angels. Does anyone know them? And you have to speak up if you're going to say something just because it's quiet. Aleppo. Is Aleppo 2 O's or 2 P's? 2 P's. Aleppo. Damascus. Next one. Baghdad and Iconium. I don't know how to spell Baghdad, so somebody help me out there. B-A-G? One person. Bud. D-A-D? Yeah. Baghdad. Really? Oh, that's easy. I really thought there was an H in there. There is an H. Where's the H? After the first D? Oh, sorry, right here. Okay. Yes? And then Iconium. So these are the four angels as marked by the pioneers. 1, 2, 3, 4, representing 4 sultans. Now, what I don't know is where Amurath was, because Amurath is one of the sultans, one of these 4 sultans that are in these locations that Constantine is going to submit to. So Amurath is the head sultan, and I don't know where his location is. If somebody knows, shout it out. But Amurath is the premier power. Amurath. I think that's how you spell it. So Amurath is the premier power of these 4 powers. So there's 4 Islamic powers, there's 4 parts to the power, and one of them is the head of that power. Or one of them is the premier power, and it's Amurath. And he's going to come to Amurath, and he's going to say, can I rule? And Amurath's going to say, yes, you can rule. And they have this treaty between them, this understanding, and he lets him rise, but something's going to happen. What happens? A couple years later, Amurath's going to die. He's going to die in the year 1451. 1451, Amurath dies. Who takes over? Muhammad II. Now, Muhammad II doesn't honor the treaty that was made. He doesn't honor the agreement or the acknowledgement. And he has his sole focus, his idea is to take the territory, or to take Constantinople. Now, what's interesting about what's taking place right now, I mean right now in the story, where we are or in the historical narrative, is that how big is the Byzantine Empire in this moment, in 1449? Is it big? Is it small? Is it medium. It's big. It's really small at this point. Why is it small? Because they're weak. They're very weak in this moment. Wish I had a map. Should have drew a map. So they're very weak right now. So I'll draw a little map. I'll draw just one thing. So you just got to, let's do this. Patient with my drawing. So it's not too bad. Right here is Constantinople. It's the capital of the Byzantine Empire at this time. And there's this really small strait here. So, and way over here is the Persian Empire. Or, I don't know if they're technically the Persians at this moment, what the exact empire name is called. But the Islamic forces are here at this time, and they have taken all of the land right up into here, right up around here, maybe even a little bit closer. But they've taken all of this, and it's really almost right up until the walls of Constantinople. So the huge Byzantine Empire that we're familiar with, that used to stretch all the way down, all the way over here, and it used to touch down into the Palestine region and touch Israel and all that, is gone. That huge empire has been completely removed from them, and they're down really to just the walls of Constantinople, which is nothing. So that's part of the reason that they need to ask permission, is because they have no territory, they have no ability at this time, and so my point is they don't have a lot at this point. Now this is important to some degree, I believe, for this reason. Now if anyone has been watching the classes in Brazil or the camp meetings, and I don't remember which this is in, but one of the things Sister Tess and Elder Parmenter are talking about is spheres of influence. That when you look at the history of Russia and the United States in 1989, in the Cold War, let's go back to the Cold War through to 1989, they never have direct engagement. What are they fighting over? Spheres of influence. They're fighting over the land between them to some extent, but they never really get to touch each other. They just touch all the other land. They touch their spheres of influence, and they remove or take, depending on the perspective, these spheres of influence. An example of this: 1989, the United States is going to defeat Russia, or defeat the USSR, but it does it by removing its sphere of influence. It's going to take the land from it, and what it takes from it is all of its satellite states. It makes it go all the way back right to Russia. So in 1989, the only thing that's left after the battle is just Russia. It's just the Russian territory, the motherland of Russia, if I can say it that way, and all the satellite states. The Soviet bloc has been dissolved. They've been conquered, but there's no direct engagement. It's just spheres of influence. You also have a sphere of influence battle in Afghanistan and so forth, and all the different battles. You know, you can go to Cuba, you can go to all these different places, Vietnam. They're fighting each other indirectly in all of these different places over their spheres of influence. But here in 1989, the sphere of influence for Russia has been shrunk down to just this last little bit of territory, just the heartland. And the territory of the United States at that point is large. It's the whole world pretty much, because they've taken everything from them. Over time, there's going to be a paradigm switch, and Russia's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger, and it's going to come back to the spots that it had lost. It's going to start gaining more and more influence. It's going to grow its spheres, and finally, by the time you get to Raphia, in the historical narrative of Daniel 11, Raphia is going to be, after the king of the south wins Raphia, it takes back all the land that it lost to some degree. and it leaves the king of the north with only just what it had initially, with some minor land. And so my point is, we have another illustration of the king of the north, the United States, the Byzantine Empire in 1449, which is the same point. And it's not an accident, I believe, that the United States is being portrayed through the Eastern Roman Empire as being a weak nation. That they're all the way back to the walls, and everything they had before has been lost, and they just have the walls now, and they have no sphere of influence, so they have a very small one. So I think it's interesting that you can see that dynamic, that same condition of the United States at the same point in time in a different story being the same in these two different narratives. So that is a point to note there. But at this point, you have the Eastern Roman Empire submitting to Islamic powers. Now, that's a provocative thought as you come to today, as you look at Raphia, which is 6 months away, and you say, this is 1449, and we're saying the historical record shows that there's going to be a submission by the United States to Islamic powers. Because you don't see it right now. You don't see, that doesn't seem possible, I guess, to some degree, at least in this very moment. So I think we need to clarify that a little bit, and that's something I hope we can do with this study to some degree. And we're going to look at that. We'll look at that a little bit more closely. But what I want to put in your mind is the urgency of looking at Islam, or at least the date of 1449, because it's the next thing that's going to happen. Now, we've been focusing a lot through Sister Tess and Elder Parmenter on the King of the North and the King of the South and their interactions as we come to Raphia. But there's obviously more things that happen at Raphia than just the dynamics with the King of the North and the King of the South, because there's also Islam that's at play. And they have a significant role here at Raphia because of 1449. So there's another aspect of Raphia that we need to begin looking at, I guess. And hopefully, by God's grace, we'll have clarity on that before we get there, but we'll see. So, in 1449, you have the submission take place. 1451, there's a change of power. Amurath is going to die, leaving Muhammad II in charge. And Muhammad II is going to renege on his treaty. He's going to not going to follow through on that, and he's going to set in motion a train of events that take you to 1453, which we understand to be, I lost my red again, which we understand to be the Midnight Cry, which is Panium. And at Panium, there's going to be, or at the, we have the walls of Constantinople coming down. And what's really interesting about this history is, how does Amurath take down the walls of Constantinople? Cannon. With a cannon. What kind of cannon? A really big one. A really, really big, first of its class cannon that's never been created. Now, cannons weren't new at that time, though they were on the newer side, of course, at that point. But this cannon maker by the name of Orban is going to make a cannon for the Persians, or for the Ottoman Empire, that is bigger than any cannon that's ever been made at that time. And he's going to make several of them. Forget exactly how many he makes. There's a number to that. He makes a lot of the big ones, and then he makes more of these smaller ones that they're going to use to take down the wall of Constantinople. And if I remember correctly, and someone correct me if I'm wrong about this fact, but these cannons can fire 7 shots a day. Anyone familiar with that number? That's true. It's true. So they fire 7 shots a day. Because of the time to load and the time to make repairs, because these cannons would blow up and they take so much damage from the explosions that are taking place that you can only get a couple shots off a day. So 7 being a prophetic number, which is interesting, to say the very least. So who is Orban? He's a canon maker. Where's he from? Where in Europe? He's from Europe. He's from Romania. He's from the geographical location of Romania. So not that that's necessarily significant today about that he's going to be a Romanian. That whoever, whatever that is typified today. But I just think it's interesting for Brother Philip in the back of the room. Conquered his people. His people conquered the Eastern Roman Empire. So what's going to happen is Orban is going to... But does Orban go straight to the Islamic power at this time? Does he go straight to Muhammad II? No, he tries first to go to Constantinople, and he says, "Hey, I'm a cannon maker, can make you cannons. Do you want to buy a big cannon?" And at first they say, "Yeah, we want to buy a big cannon. That'd be great." And so they put him on retainer, or maybe retainer is the wrong word, but they put him on a stipend, I think might be the right word, a small amount. But he realizes very quickly that they can't pay it. They're too poor at this point to pay for the work that he needs to have done, and they just don't have the ability to get it done in this moment. And so they kind of go back and forth for a little bit, and he realizes they can't pay. And finally, he says, "Okay, I'm out." And so he goes, and now he goes to, being like any good entrepreneur, he's going to go to Muhammad II, and he's going to come to Muhammad II and say, "I can make you a cannon." And Muhammad II says, "Can you make a cannon big enough to take down the walls of Constantinople?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Give me a month." I think it was a month. And so he takes, it's either a month or 3 months. So he takes at least a month, and he builds this cannon. And this cannon's the biggest, like we said, it's the biggest cannon that's ever made. It's new in that regard. And it's a new type of warfare to some degree, or an unseen weapon, or a new type of that weapon. And he's going to show them all the things that it can do. Muhammad II has the money, has the ability to pay for it, and so they go forward with this deal. And he's gonna make all these cannons for him, and he's gonna take down the walls of Constantinople in 1453. Reason I'm saying that story is because as you tell the story of the historical facts that take you from 1449, which is midnight, to the midnight cry, or from Raphia to Panium, there's a lot of details in there that are really interesting, like the fact that this is a European going to first the Roman Empire, and then next to the Islamic power, and then he's going to try to do work for both of them, and it's only going to be the Islamic power who's able to do it. These are provocative ideas. How does that pan out today? So these are some of the things we need to be looking at to some degree. But we should start with 1449 because that's the next thing that's taking place. And so the walls of Constantinople are going to come down in 1453, and there's going to be this space of time that takes you to. They're going to take you to the Sunday Law, or 1844, where the Islamic power is again going to be restrained, like in 1440. Now what's interesting is that in 1449, the Eastern Roman Empire is going to submit to let me say it this way, the Roman Empire is going to submit to 4 Islamic powers. But as you get to the end of the history, in 1840, the end of the Ottoman Empire. Now, it's not the official end of the Ottoman Empire, but it's where they lose their teeth, I guess you could say it that way. In 1840, where Turkey is going to submit, what happens is the Islamic power is going to submit to 4 European powers. So there's a switch there. There's a contrast there, or maybe contrast wrong, where there's a, I don't know the right way, there's a switch at least. Chiasm might be, yeah, maybe that's the right word. I was thinking chiasm, I just didn't know if that would work there. So there's a switching. You go 4 Islamic with 1 Roman, or we'll say 1 European, and then 4 Europeans with 1 Islamic. And here, it's the one that's always weak. Here the Roman is weak. Here the Here the Islamic power is weak. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a moment. So, that's the history of Revelation 9. Now, I'm positive that there's a lot of things in Revelation 9 that we don't understand. There's a lot more there. We don't understand the dynamics of the multiple 150-year time periods in Revelation 9. There's things about the symbology that need to be studied out more. So there's a lot more than that, but this seems to be a correct basic structure to what we have so far. Now we need to just start plugging in all the other details. So the next thing I want to look at in our remaining time is I want to look at Numbers 22. This is Numbers 22 right here. So in Revelation 9, you have the history of Islam. And what we understood is that when you come to Numbers 22, it's also showing you the history of Islam through the ass. And we've identified that the ass prophetically is a symbol of the Islamic powers. Of Islam, let me just say Islam. So in Numbers 22, the story begins, and if you can turn to Numbers 22 so we can read on and off as we go forward. So if you turn to Numbers 22 with me. Numbers 22, and we'll start in verse 22, right around there. So the story begins, let's start in verse 21, sorry. The story begins, and Balaam rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass and went with the princes of Moab. So you have Balaam rises up in the morning. Now, when is the morning? How would we know what the morning is? What? The sunrise. When does the sun rise? When does the sun rise on the line? 1989. Why? Because before that point, we're in a time period of darkness. It's the nighttime. And now the sun is starting to break, and the morning is beginning. Now, if you look at the history, if you look at the Great Controversy, let me say it that way. If you look at the Great Controversy, Sister White, and you look at the chapter titles, and I'm doing this by memory, I don't have them, I'm not looking at them at the moment, but let me pull them up just quickly. Should take about a second. If you go to the Great Controversy, okay, got it here. So if you go chapter 16. Chapter 16 of the Great Controversy is the Pilgrim Fathers. Pilgrim Fathers are the people who are going to come out of the time of darkness, and they're going to come to they're going to come out of Europe, and they're going to come to the United States and begin the work of setting up the United States that takes you to 1798. The next chapter is the Heralds of the Morning. Now, she's identifying there, what is the Heralds of the Morning? Does anyone know? In that chapter, what are the Heralds of the Morning? What? You would think it's the Reformers, and I think at one level that's true to some degree. But it's the signs that are going to take place. You're going to have the signs that Christ talked about in the sun, moon, and stars, and the different things that are going to take place, the earthquake, the dark day, the falling of the stars. All of these things are the heralds of the morning that are pointing to the morning. And so what that's telling you is that you're in the darkness in these. So let me say it this way. Let me give another depiction. What are the I don't know if that's. I might be wrong, so I don't want to say it. But I'm just going to say it because if we agree it's correct, then it's interesting at least. When you're in the darkness, when you're at night, you watch the moon, you watch the stars, you watch those things, and you see the ambient light that's there or not there, and you can tell that morning is coming. For instance, I leave for work before the sun comes up most days. When I drive, the night before I can see where the moon is, and when I wake up I know where the moon is going to be. And I can see that, oh, if the moon is there, then I know that it's almost morning. Obviously I know it's morning because it's morning and I woke up. But I mean, you can see celestially that that's taking place, that the celestial bodies have moved in such a way that the morning is almost present or is almost there. So those are signs. But the signs that she's talking about here are the signs that are taking place, the dark day, the earthquake, these different things that are taking place. So that's what she's talking about there. But the next thing she's going to talk about is a great religious awakening. And then she's going to talk about an American reformer, which is Miller. So she's telling us that the history before 1989 is this darkness, and that there's things that happen in the darkness that are pointing you toward the morning, and now we're going to have this light begin to break upon the reform line and upon the world, or upon the world. That's fine. And so you can see that taking place there. And so even in the Great Controversy, you can see the dynamic of darkness and then morning. So long point. But what we want to see is that when Balaam's getting on his ass, he's doing it. He rose up in the morning and he saddles his ass, and he's going with the princes of Moab to go do a work. What is he going to do? What's his work? He's going to go curse Israel. Now, is Balaam a good prophet or a bad prophet at this point? He's a bad prophet. Now, he was a good prophet. Now, he had the opportunity to be a good prophet right up until this point. Because what happens in the previous part of the chapter is the Lord is the Moabites are going to come to him, and they're going to say, hey, we want you to curse Israel. And he could have said no, he could have listened to the Lord, and that would have put him in a good position with the Lord, but he chose to follow his greed and his ambition, and he's going to apostatize from the Lord and go contrary to what the Lord desires. So he's going to go curse Israel. So Balaam rises up in the morning, saddles his ass, and he goes forward along this way to curse Israel. So his work is to curse Israel. Now, another line we can put under this is Psalms 48. Now let's just turn to Psalms 48 for just one moment. Psalms 48. And we'll start in verse 2. Beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. God is known in her palaces for a refuge. For lo, the kings were assembled, they passed by together. They saw it, and so they marveled, and they were troubled and hasted away. Fear took hold upon them. Fear took hold upon them there in pain, as a woman in travail. Thou breakest the ships of Tarshish with an east wind. So there's a lot going on there, but what we see, the narrative there is that you have the scene opens and you're looking at Mount Zion, you're looking at Jerusalem, and the kings are assembled against Jerusalem to take Jerusalem because they look how beautiful it is. And they're going to try to take it, but they're unable to do it because something happens. The east wind comes, it breaks the ships of Tarshish, and they're no longer focused on that thing. And we understand that this is describing the role of Islam for us, that Islam is distracting the powers of the world, or the United States even, from enacting the Sunday law and going along the way of destroying Jerusalem, which we know will inevitably happen at the Sunday law, prophetically. And they're stopping that from taking place when it could have taken place, we understand, at 9/11, or the process could have began at 9/11. So they get in the way of that, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. I'm going to close now, and I have the next presentation as well, so we'll just pick up from this point. So what we're doing right now is we're covering what we understand about Revelation 9, Numbers 22. We're going to go back over some, we'll start in the notes after that in the next presentation. And we're going to we're doing this to get so we're all on the same page, so as we move forward, we can see the connections that are going to be made to the older material as we go forward. Okay, so let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this time that we have together. We ask now that you would bless and guide us, Lord. And as we continue these meetings, we ask for your fervency, Lord, and we ask that you would guide us and that you would grace these meetings with your presence and with the presence of the angels. We pray that you would help us to receive these things, that these things to be a savor of life unto life to us. We ask that we'd take these messages seriously and that these things would have a saving power upon each and every one of us. We ask for a blessing upon on all the different aspects of this camp meeting, from the preparations to the camera equipment to the kitchen and the presenters, Lord, and just all the guests, Lord. And we just pray that everything would go according to your will and that everything could be a blessing to each and every one of us, Lord. We just thank you and we love you. In Jesus' name, amen.